I am here at Worldly Experiences. I'm Jeff Ritter here with Krish Mohan for our second interview for Career Explorations. And he's a comedian. Can you tell he's a comedian just by looking at him? You must be a comedian. No, in the United States, they probably ask you, are you a computer programmer? Do you get that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, every so often they'll find my ethnicity and ask me if I'm in tech or something like that. But I'm not. I know some things about tech that I've taught myself, but a lot of times it's me frustratedly cursing at my computer and trying to figure out what's going on if there's ever a troubleshooting problem.
I only mentioned the stereotypes because you deal with it in your comedy.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't automatically start dealing with stereotypes if they didn't already do it. So let's just start at the early stage. I mean, I think in college you were doing a little bit of comedy. Is that really where you started, on sort of open stages, open mics?
Yeah, I actually started in high school. I did a talent show in my junior year of high school, and I wasn't like, I got into the talent show. You had to audition for it, and it was like mostly bands, a couple like dance troupes. I think there was like one like group of actors that like redid a scene for from a movie or a play or something like that, but no one was really doing comedy. So like the teachers that were running it were kind of confused as to what to do with me, because it's like there's nothing to compare me to. So they put me in 3 different times to cover like the band setting up backstage. So they asked me if I had 15 minutes of material, and I lied and said yes. I had like maybe 8, right? Like I just started and I was like, I'll do an hour if you want me to. That's which was a total total lie. But and then during like the what do they call it? Like the dry runs, like the rehearsals that they would do, just so everybody knows where they're going. I kind of like workshopped a new 5 minutes, and then I just kept doing it after that. I would go to like coffee shops. There was a coffee shop particularly every Friday night that I would go to, that a good friend of mine, Derek Christek, who's in a great band now. He has his own solo project that he released called Omniverse, but he's in a band called Recluse that tours around the country as well, or was touring around the country. But he was the one that encouraged me to go to do these open stages. So I kind of got used to doing like these non-comedy open mics, right? Like they were more with musicians and poets and things of that sort. So the audience was a lot more open-minded and a lot more forgiving when you go up and fail than when I started doing comedy open mics. It was a whole different ball game, because most of the time these comedy open mics aren't in coffee shops or the community area at a college or something along those lines, right? Where people come on purpose to see what's going on. They're just at a bar trying to have a drink. And you're like, hey, do you guys want to know about my thoughts and feelings and my innermost desires? And most of them are like, no.
You're ready to share those. You're ready to share those pretty quickly. Is it the story of a young person who's an extrovert who always wanted to be in front of an audience? Is that your kind of thing?
Not really. I was always the weird intellectual kid that I was always just curious. I like ideas and history and philosophy and stuff. That's where I came from.
Okay.
But I was also a bit of a smartass. That's probably the closest thing to like any sort of performance that I did in classrooms. I just asked a lot of questions, and like that natural curiosity I think really helps in terms of comedy, is because you start asking questions about why things are the way they are. There's really a Socratic method to it, that so I was never like the funny kid in class. Like I just didn't want to be picked on. That's really where it came from. And when I was picked on, like humor became like a little bit of a defense mechanism, so that a little bit of that smart ass thing that I would do kind of ended up being a defense mechanism. I had no intention on doing comedy as like a full-time thing when I first started. It was just sort of a fun thing to do. And then college, really, when I was doing in college, um, I would do it quite often at La Roche, like once or twice a month. And then there would be these weird coffee shop open mics that I would go to. And I think that's really when I was like, I want to make this a career, but I don't know how, because there's no like guidebook
Yeah.
to help you figure out how to be a touring comedian or a full-time performer. It's sort of, you just kind of play it by ear and try to figure it out, and you might meet some people that have figured something else out. So it's very like loose. Really.
I like the way you mentioned that with philosophy and curiosity and an intellectual. You're almost like you're a certain type of person that doesn't have a natural job you fit into, so you sort of fit yourself into this job that exists, but you're making it different to fit you.
A little bit, yeah. I'm not a good employee, is what I've discovered. Is I've had a lot of jobs, but a lot of those times it's like I have to force myself to just be quiet, because there's all these like managerial inconsistencies when you work for like Starbucks or a grocery store or something, and you're just kind of standing there a lot. And it's that old adage of like, if you got time to lean, you got time to clean. And it's just like, but everything's clean. Like, you can't over clean stuff. That's crazy. Like, so I would kind of, I would kind of get in trouble if I would question stuff. So so a lot of times I was just bored at these jobs. And even when I had like office jobs, I would get my work done, I would get bored. So I would just start writing anyway. Like I would think of stuff and I would just start writing either like in a notebook or like a Word document or something. So I'm not like a model employee. Like I'm not somebody that people want to hire to be like, he'll get the job done. It's like, he'll get the job done and then he'll kind of disappear for a while and no one knows where he is because he's bored all the time.
So let's go back to what you said about the uh, the philosophy and the intellectualism and things like that. That filters into everyday comedy that you do, or do you sometimes just try to hit them with a belly laugh?
The idea with it is, especially because I'm an unknown comic, like I don't have like a large following or like a huge fan base or anything. Most of the people that are coming to see me at any show don't like you want to get them on your side as quickly as possible, right? Like most audiences are very generous and they're very like open to being like, they don't want you to fail, right? Like you don't go to a comedy show or a music show to be like, boy, I hope this band fails, right? Like you want to enjoy it. So you want to hit them with something that they can relate to, that gives them an understanding of who you are, and makes them laugh, right? Like if you talk to most comedy club owners, there's this thing called laugh per minute. And I hate that term because it
Really?
quantifies,
Ah,
yeah, it quantifies art and it's just, yeah, it doesn't feel right when like you can't quantify art into mathematical terms or anything. Art is what it is. But you do want to get them laughing as quickly as possible. So, sometimes it takes me a minute or two to set something up and then hit them with a big punch. Just because if I'm talking about my cultural background, if I'm talking about being Indian and growing up in an Indian household, they don't know what it's like to grow up in an immigrant household, right? So I have to kind of give them a little extra setup, and that extra setup can lead to a joke. It might not be the biggest joke, but it's something to kind of get them to understand where you're coming from and what the humor is going to be like. And then once you kind of have them on your side, then you can kind of go deeper into essentially whatever you want, right? Like Carlin used to do that all the time. Like George Carlin. Now, Carlin ended up having a fan base over the course of a 30, 40-year career. But even in his specials, he was talking about something a little kind of innocuous, and a little easy to deal with, right? Like he might bring up something about the grocery store first before going into criticizing religion, before going into criticizing the political state, because unless you have a big following, it's very difficult for you to just go up and start talking about political theory because they don't know where you're coming from. And it's kind of a dicey, touchy subject anyway. So you got to hit them with the belly laugh first, but you have to make it a little bit more relatable. You kind of have to softball it first, just so they trust you and get on board, and then you can kind of guide them in whatever direction
Okay.
you want to go in.
Now you sort of said at the beginning there's no roadmap for becoming a comedian, but you're kind of telling us there are some concepts to learn and rules almost of things to know about. Did you pick these up yourself, or is there actually a place that you got this?
I picked it up by failing a lot.
Okay.
They're all mistakes that you make. I've definitely gone up as a younger comic, and if I wanted to talk about the topic of immigration in general, right, not growing up as an immigrant, but just immigration reform or something along those lines, that's a big heavy topic that has a lot of intricacies and nuances to it, and I just kind of went into assuming the audience knows what I know, and it fails, right?
Yeah.
Like either nobody laughs or people are a little confused about what's going on. And when that happens, like I record pretty much all the sets that I've done, from what I've done from open mics to full shows where I'm working out like an hour plus worth of material. So I record all of those things so I can listen back to it and go, well, I know why that's funny, but the audience didn't seem to get why that's funny. I wonder if I'm not explaining this properly, or do I need to add something different, or is this misplaced? Let's take what if I take this chunk and move it further down, and then take that and move it further up so it makes more sense? And then you just got to try it, right? Like I said, if knowing that the audience doesn't want you to fail, if you go in and get them to trust you up front, then you can kind of take some of these risks, 10, 15 minutes into your act, and they'll go along with it. And even if they don't find it funny and they're a little confused, they're willing to, what I've noticed is they're willing to be like, I didn't really understand where you were coming from. Like they're willing to talk to you about it because they like you. They don't want you to keep failing, right? So, but I've honestly just learned all that stuff from doing it, from failing over and over again, and then looking at what failed and seeing how it can succeed, and not just leaving it as something that just kind of fell apart.
No, that's a great insight to start off with, especially, I mean, if you've never done it before, to think that. I've been in front of an audience, I've never thought that before. I always thought it's a little bit of adversarial position there, but I think you're probably right. It would change a lot of attitudes to think of things that way. Now, I've watched a bunch of your stuff so far, and I can tell from certainly a lot of your promo materials, you want to be out there. You want to be edgy. You're pushing some bad. Oh, I wore my First Amendment T-shirt for you.
Yeah.
Because you're in that realm. Why did you choose that? I mean, there's lots of other kinds of comics. You chose to be this? How come?
It's just what naturally made sense to me. I've always kind of thought that way, and I mean, really, it is a form of observational comedy, but I think comedy that talks about like socio-political topics and challenges the establishment and challenges the way things are, I think is the purest form of comedy. If you think back to the jesters in the court, they were the only ones that could really call out the king for what he is without getting killed, right? That was, and that's to me, that's the purpose of art. Art is meant to challenge the status quo. It's meant to challenge things that aren't working. And something like comedy, I do genuinely believe that comedy is the people's art form, right? It's the art form that connects to the working class person, the average working class person, because it is talking about things that affect your day-to-day life, but it's doing it in a way where you can kind of laugh at how ridiculous it is. that this is the way we've accepted things to go. And there is an opportunity for it to change minds, but there's also an opportunity for people to get upset with you and challenge you, challenging them in a way.
Well, what about the escapism aspect? Don't you think some people are there to escape everyday life and would just like to laugh at the silly observations too?
Oh, absolutely. And that's kind of the amazing part of it. Is my opinion is that doing like comedy that challenges the establishment and makes you think while you're laughing is the purest form of comedy based on where this art form has come from. But it's not to say that if you do go up and you want to talk about, the weird things at the grocery store, just so people can escape the drudges of life, right? The political theater that surrounds us on a day-to-day basis. That's not the wrong form of comedy. I love Brian Regan. To me, Brian Regan is pound for pound the best clean comedian in the country. His observations, his jokes, and the way his mind works I've never seen anybody's mind work that way. And he is a incredible writer, and I've never seen him do the same joke twice in any new special that he puts out. And I've seen the dude live like 4 times and never saw any material repeated. But that's not to say that I think that's the wrong form of comedy. I think that's amazing. Comedy is an art form that's very versatile. It's just what feels right to you. I've always kind of been this weird, thinky, intellectual person. I talk about ideas and theory and philosophy and history all the time. That's just sort of who I am. So this just felt natural. And there were points in my career where I was trying to escape that because it didn't quote unquote fit, right? Like, I'm not going to get booked on this bar show because, oh, you're talking about touchy subjects, and well, we don't want the audience to get alienated. So if I went up and I just did material about my stereotype, well, it didn't feel right to me. And if I'm not passionate about what I'm talking about, if I'm not excited about the topics that I'm addressing on stage, then how can I expect the audience to be excited, it's the stuff that I'm saying. So there's no right or wrong way to do comedy. It's just a matter of what do you want to do with it. The people I've always admired, people like Carlin and Richard Pryor, Bill Hicks, Janine Garofalo, they all took risks on stage and they all challenged the status quo. And I was like that. I always was attracted to that. But then you have people like Mitch Hedberg and Brian Regan and Jim Gaffigan and everything. They're not inherently saying anything political or challenging to the establishment, but rather pointing out the absurdities of day-to-day life, or kind of weaving a little bit of a tapestry of of absurdity and frivolity that I think you can still enjoy. That's I think is the beautiful aspect of comedy, is you don't have to lock it into one thing. And I get a lot of flack from, because I'm excited to talk about these topics, but there are comedy clubs that won't book comedians like me because it's too challenging. And they, me talking about something like immigration or gun control means that they're not selling enough chicken tenders, and that's affecting their bottom line. So I don't blame them for it, but my argument is I don't think you should be dictating what people say or don't say on stage. But you, as a comedian, you should also be ready to face the consequences of you saying what you're saying on stage. Like, as much as it is a right for you to say it, it's also a right for the audience to criticize what you're saying, and for you to accept the critique and know how to defend it, if that's your goal.
So it's going to be one of those classic situations of, will you ever compromise to get more famous, or will you stick with your guns and change the audience and change the venues to accept what you're doing?
Me personally, I stopped caring about getting famous. I'm more focused on the art itself and saying something that to me means something. And my hope is that if somebody's listening, whether they have, followed me for 10 years or they just found me on YouTube or something, I hope that, you get something out of it too. It does make me less viable for fame, and that's fine. I don't think I want it. You know what I mean? Like my goal in comedy was always to get about 30 to 50 people in a room that came to see me on purpose. That was really the big goal that I established for myself when I started touring, especially when I started touring full time. I I like the intimacy of a smaller room. I think you can connect with a crowd a little bit more. And a big thing for me is after the show, I like to go and hang out and
Hmm.
talk to people and continue the conversation, while we're having drinks and we're, you know, cutting up on whatever, making fun of whatever it is. Like, and if you want to talk about the big, great Marvel movie, I'm down for that too. I like the communal aspect of it, and I think that's harder to achieve when you're playing a big stadium, and you have a line of 2 to 3,000 people waiting to get their autograph and a book and a photo. It's like you don't really get to talk to people. You don't really get to know people or really the area of from where you are. So
Good.
I that's what I like out of comedy. There's a
Good. Good.
community that comes from it.
We wouldn't mind seeing you more famous, but actually, let's talk a little bit about process and
Mhm.
some of the nitty gritty. How do you write every day? Do you what's the process you go through to make your create your material? You watch a lot of CNN, C-Sport, and what do you do? Where do you gather up ideas?
Uh, well, so I do a couple different things. For stand up, it's really hard to talk about specific current events. Like I don't really have any Trump jokes in my act because it's not evergreen. It doesn't stand the
Mm.
test of time. Even if like something, like let's say Medicare for all does pass, hypothetically speaking, and I've talked about that on stage. Even if it does pass and somebody goes back and listens to my bit about it, they can at least go, oh man, that was a point in history where somebody had to make an argument for it, and make an argument for it comedically too. So it kind of stands the test of time in one way or the other. That's what I try to do in stand up. So in stand up, I try to talk more about ideas. I started doing this web show when I in 2013 when I was really trying to write more political humor, and that was more like based on news stories and what was going on in politics and stuff like that. And for that, it's I have to read, like if I read an article from CNN and they mention something that I don't know, but it's pertaining to the article, then now I have to go look that up. So you kind of go into this rabbit hole. And for a show like that, where I'm digging deeper, like if I'm writing something about the separation of church and state, I want to learn as much as I can about it because I might read something very innocuous, I might read something very mundane, but that might lead to something very interesting, right? That might lead to like something about Thomas Jefferson owning a cow that he loved very much, or something. You know what I mean? Like it'll lead to something that'll kind of lead to helping me make the comedy out of it because it's weird and interesting and it's part of this idea
Mhm.
and it shaped this idea a little bit more. So I do have to like do a lot of research and I do a lot of note taking. I'm more inspired by information. That's where I find a lot of humor because human history and human behavior is
Yeah.
fascinating and hilarious.
Uh-huh.
Like the things we do and the things we have done for whatever reason is hilarious to me. Like starting we launched a 10,000 ships over a girl, like monkeys aren't doing that, right? Like there's a lion that decided that it's going to go to war with a competing pride because a female chose a different mate, right? Like they're not doing that sort of stuff. That's fascinating stuff to me. And it's not the typical fascinating stuff. And that's my challenge, is how do I make that interesting? How do I bring that around to convey the right amount of information and add jokes to it, so people are kind of paying attention to it and they're not just like, oh, well, we get it. Helen of Troy this was a crazy thing, right? We all saw the Brad Pitt movie, Krish, like, so yeah.
So every
And
day, some writing, looking up material,
yeah,
inspiration.
now especially when I was touring, and hopefully we'll be touring again soon,
Okay.
fingers crossed. But it's working on one show, and the way that I've been doing it for the last couple of years is I have a thesis statement. I have a point that I'm either trying to prove or disprove on stage, and then kind of looking at ideas that either are on the periphery or directly connected to it, and seeing, does this make sense? Can I make the argument that I want to make with these ideas, and can I do it humorously, or is it too dark and depressing? And then you have a choice to make, right? Like, there are certain statements that I have to make that are just that. They are just statements. And I have to make a choice with that. So when I'm working on a show like that, I'm constantly tweaking that one show every night on stage. And then when I'm driving to the next city, I'll listen back to my set, and then I'll get to the venue and I'll take notes. And, if I'm changing a large chunk of it, I will physically write stuff down on a piece of paper, and I have to refer to that stuff on stage until I know it. And it kind of comes naturally to me. And honestly, I record live albums when I feel like the album is ready to be recorded and released and stuff. For most of them, I have tweaked little tiny bits of the show up till the night. Like, sometimes I'm even tweaking it while I'm on stage and seeing, okay, maybe this will be a little bit better. It might be 3% better than it was when I recorded it last night. So that's a constant state for me, of just kind of tweaking and making sure it's getting just right, and I can still kind of make it funnier, still kind of make my point a little bit more eloquently. With the shows that I do, I have 2 podcasts that I do. I'm writing every week, and usually the process for that is I'll do a bunch of research. Like, I have a day or 2 set to just do research and take notes. And if I come up with jokes or something, I'll jot them down so I remember them. And then I just write the script. And the first draft, the best thing to do, and this was a lesson that I learned when I was in college, actually, is when you're doing your first draft in anything creative, just put all of the ideas out there. Whatever comes to your head, just write it all down. And then when you go back and edit it, you'll see, like, oh, well, this was a dumb idea. Like, this doesn't even, what am I even saying in this statement? Like, it doesn't even, where is this joke coming from? It has nothing to do with any of the things that we've been talking about for the last 5 minutes. And you can kind of edit it and piecemeal it, and go with the process that way. So I don't write every day, but I write quite a bit throughout the week. I probably spend on an average week, I'm probably spending about 4 or 5 days, just writing and tweaking pieces and then producing them.
I did notice on stage some of that tweaking. You're making even an observation sometimes. Oh, that didn't work, or that worked on this half of the audience. This half got it, that half didn't. So you're making mental notes about changing things.
Yeah, that's
it
also,
comes out 'cause it's funny.
Yeah, and honestly, that kind of grew out of my own anxiety, of like things that I think are funny but nobody else does, and when they don't laugh, I fell into just kind of commenting on it, and that's funny enough for me to go, okay, I can get to the next thing. Especially if I'm building to something a little bit more challenging, right? Like, if I'm building to a bit about gun control or something, and the last line of this one particular joke just landed flat, and it's like, okay, well, I guess that was a little too much for you guys. This next part's going to be really rough. And that kind of gets the crowd to just relax a little bit. But it really just came out of my own anxiety of I don't want them to feel completely uncomfortable.
Okay. We do
So,
have the ability to get some questions. If you're watching and you have a
yes.
question, put it in the chat, and we'll be happy to get to some of those questions. Let's get to again some of the nitty gritty. You're doing
Yep.
travel, you're doing podcasts, you're doing touring, you're doing when you are doing it, you're doing booking, doing all this yourself. It's a constant thing that you're doing all these things.
Yeah. So I do
Yeah.
most of that. Yeah. When I was touring a lot, it gets easier every year, because you make more connections, and once you show up to a city and you perform for the first time and you do well, you can go back to that same booker and say, hey, I'm coming back on, in September or whatever, and they'll go, great, we have these dates, do any of these line up? And then boom, that's done, right? Like it's not like when I was first starting out, I had to research venues, I had to find comedy producers, I'm talking to other comedians that have been through the area to see if I can get any tips. So just to get 2 weeks booked might take me a month and a half to do, just because I'm kind of going through and, kind of getting bounced from one person to the next. But once you kind of lay a little bit of a foundation and you meet people, you form a relationship with venues and venue owners and things of that sort, it becomes easier. You can just kind of go and say, hey, I'm coming through on tour on this date. Do you have any dates available that kind of fit this date range? And they'll say yes or no. And if they say no, I'll ask them if they have any recommendations, right? Like and all this administrative part is like, it's the boring part of the job.
Yeah.
Like that's the part of the job that no one really no one really talks about. But the idea and the goal is, I kind of like having that personal relationship with producers and venue owners and stuff like that, just because I am working with smaller venues anyway. But like I help other comedians book tours that are on a higher level than me, and then I'll get to open for them, in front of their crowd, and sometimes their fan base will become my fan base, which is a very cool feeling, when that sort of stuff happens. And that's essentially like, it just makes things easier because you don't have to worry about the administrative stuff. You can just worry about the creative things. Honestly, for me, if I can get somebody to take care of social media and video editing, I'm set. Like that would be.
We'll keep looking for it. We could find you someone.
Yeah.
And it is kind of the golden age of ethnic comedians, is it not? I mean, is it?
Yeah, I think in the last probably like 5 years, we've seen diversity in comedy open up.
Amazing.
Amazing, yeah, which has been great. You're seeing a lot more. You're seeing a lot more Black comics come out. You're seeing a lot more Asian American comics come out. Indian comedians come out. But you're also seeing a lot more people from the LGBTQ community and bring that perspective to the table, which, in the early 90s or even in the early 2000s was very, very rare to see somebody like that, especially on television. And now, you have 10 or 15 people on Netflix that are part of the LGBTQ community. There's a whole thing on Netflix about comedians from around the world, which I think adds a unique perspective. And again, it's that whole thing, like comedy can connect us, right? Like I watched some of this stuff from India just to see what they were doing. And it's very interesting. There's a lot of storytellers from India, which makes sense because that's part of the culture. Like, especially even from Hinduism, is very story oriented. So that it's very cool to kind of see that aspect of it. There's stuff from Australia, is like some of the references I don't get, but I'm curious enough to go, I didn't really get that. I wonder what that means. And I can look that up and then kind of, I'm like, oh, okay, I get that now. You know what I mean? So it's super
So is
cool
this
to see.
diversity good for you, or is it now there's lots of Indian comedians? You're not so unique anymore.
No, I think it's definitely good. I don't think I've ever really, I don't think I've ever really been like a traditional Indian comedian,
Yeah.
and to kind of open up what the definition of what it means to be an Indian comedian or a trans comedian or, you know, a gay comedian or whatever identity you choose, and to kind of open up the definition of that is an incredibly positive thing, because it does veer us away from stereotypes a little bit more. And, you know, you can kind of look at people for just being people, and realize like some of these experiences that everybody has are pretty similar. And it connects people. Like, again, it's a big, huge world, but I think comedy has a way of making it smaller, and bringing people closer together, which is cool, which is awesome. And I think it's very, very necessary. And I'm glad to see it.
I've seen so many open up their sets with, yes, I'm X. I know you're thinking about it. Now I'm just going to say it, so it doesn't have to be, you're wondering, am I this or am I that? I'm just going to tell you right out. And it's good for laughs, but it's also good for making people feel more comfortable.
Yeah, it gives the audience the direction of the perspective that you're gonna take the show in.
Yeah.
You know, so they get an idea of what the show is really gonna be. There's been a lot of times where people will come to my shows, and I do talk about being Indian. It's something like, I can't ignore my own heritage, right? Like it's literally in my blood, you know. So why wouldn't I talk about it? But because they have a foundation of other Indian comedians like Russell Peters, or even someone like Kondabolu, who's starting to get a little bit more notoriety, they assume that I'm going to be more like them. And sometimes they get disappointed, but now that kind of the narratives are opening up a little bit more, and if you're Indian, you can be an intellectual, you can be a philosopher, or you can just talk about inane, weird things.
Yeah.
People, you know, once they kind of get to know you, they go, okay, this wasn't particularly what I expected, but I enjoyed it. This was different, but I enjoyed it. I liked it.
I'm not going to have this ethnic comedian. I'm going to get this kind of comedy.
Right.
Anybody can do anything. I get. Or we do have a question about it. We have a question from one viewer. What does it matter where you live or base of operation? Usually LA and New York, Boston. Does Pittsburgh help you in this realm, or is it you can be really from anywhere now?
I think you can just be from anywhere now. I think there used to be a notion that you had to go to LA or New York to make it, and that still exists within the world of comedy. But I mean, I know incredible comedians that have, you know, gained national notoriety, that have gotten television credits from Memphis. Mo Alexander is an amazing comedian out of Memphis, Tennessee. He lives in Memphis, and he's been on Comedy Central. You know, he's gotten spots on NBC and stuff. So it's, you don't have to go to those cities. I think if you want to make a comfortable living as a comedian, when you're touring full time, like learning how to budget stuff is really important. So, you know, like living in Pittsburgh's incredibly affordable. It's in a pretty centralized location where if I want to build a tour, I can build a tour going to the Northeast for 2.5 weeks. I can go down south through DC into the Carolinas. I can head into the Midwest, and from the Midwest, I can pretty much splinter to a multitude of different directions, right? If I go to Columbus and do a show there, I can really go south and head into Louisville and, you know, Tennessee and Alabama and all of those things. And realistically, the only thing you really have to learn, and this takes a little while to learn, is routing. I definitely had to learn how big states are.
Oh yeah.
Like Alabama is a big state.
There's some distances there you got to travel. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, you kind of learn those things where, from what I've heard, I've never lived in LA or New York. And I'm not sure that it's either of those cities particularly suit my personality. New York definitely doesn't suit my personality. It's too much, and there's too much competition. And, you know, I I like that there's a little bit of quiet here. Like I can come off the road and I don't have this obligation to go and do 3 open mics the day after I get off the road, after I've done a 3-week tour. I can just kind of stay home and take care of myself. Where in New York, if you don't do that, then you get forgotten, and you're going to be replaced by the next
Yeah.
comedian that's going and doing 17 open mics in one night.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've gathered about LA is that LA is very difficult to tour from because it's just kind of far away from certain places.
Okay.
In California, in and of itself, I mean, I've done 2 cross-country tours, and California is a state that you kind of have to really budget your time through.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very large state.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
That's another question. How long did it take for you to be able to earn a living in comedy? Do you have to do other work too, or I think you're a graphic designer as well, right?
Yeah. I stopped doing graphic design probably 4 or 5 years ago. I tried to do graphic design while I was on tour, and it's as a freelancer, it's very difficult, and I got really tired of chasing people down for money, which is ironic because you would figure that I would meet more people in comedy that don't want to pay me than I would in graphic design. It took a while when I graduated college in 2010, and I really didn't know what I was doing with it. So I went and did open mics. I met a couple comics that were working clubs pretty regularly, and there's a host, the middle spot, which is called the feature spot, and then the headliner. And realistically, depending on where you live, you could make a very good living as a feature comedian at comedy clubs, for 20 to 30 weeks out of the year. And, it's a good, easy spot because the audience is warmed up. You're getting paid a good amount of money every single weekend. And usually the club will feed you. So, you can keep your expenses low and earn an income doing that. The way that I started doing it, because I chose to do the material that I was doing, I kind of built my own path by working with more independent venues, listening rooms, underground clubs, basement bars, house shows, things of that sort, and working out door deals with them. And like I said, my goal was always to try to get 30 to 50 people in a room that want to see me on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a little while to build there. And I will say, the unfortunate thing about this pandemic is that the momentum has probably stopped, and like I'm probably 2 or 3 steps behind because of that. And that's fine. I've been there before, and I know, at least I know what the steps to take to kind of rebuild that momentum again. But it took I would say probably 5 years before I was pretty comfortable. Like I started touring full time in 2012, and 2012 and 2013, I would take side gigs when I would come home. Like I worked at the Natural History Museum, and they had a pretty flexible schedule, and that was like a nice little supplementary income when I would come home and have 2 or 3 weeks off the road. But the more I went out on the road, and the more I connected with people, and it's like they signed up for your email list, or they follow you on social media, or or they're following your website or your videos and things of that sort. It just started generating a little bit more, and it is a slow process. Even to get to a point where 30 to 50 people are coming out to see me on purpose. I mean, there are certain cities I can count on, right? Like Pittsburgh, if I do a show, there's a very good likelihood that I will get that amount of people to come see me at a show.
Yeah.
Minneapolis, Huntsville, Alabama, Louisville, Kentucky. It's like, but I've been through those cities several times, made no money at some of those shows. But, it's like there might be 5 people at a show, and 4 of them loved you, and they go and tell 3 of their other friends, and the next time you come through town 6 months later, now all of a sudden you have 20 people in the room because a little bit of word of mouth got around. So, I mean, really the one thing I will say is it takes a little while, but but if you keep doing it, it's worth it. And don't get discouraged because there's a small crowd. You kind of never know what that small crowd could turn into.
No, it's certainly a classic don't give up
Yeah.
situation. Yeah. And if you really want it, you got to keep going and you got to go through the hardships. And if you're good, I mean, there's certainly people that should give up, right? I mean,
Yeah, I've seen my fair share um, of bad comedy,
yeah,
and a lot of it is, it's just they're kids and they don't know they don't know how to get the audience to trust them. So
yeah,
they saw a George Carlin special and think that, oh, well, I can go up and talk about capital punishment. And it's like, no. Carlin worked 30 years to get to that point.
yeah,
Like you kind of have to know, you kind of need to build your own voice first. You kind of
mhm,
have to figure out who you are as a person first. Um, it, because to me, I think an audience can figure that out. If you're being disingenuous on stage, unless you're purposefully doing a character on stage, I think an audience can kind of fish that out. And if you're disingenuous, they're not
yeah.
gonna buy it.
Yeah, no, that's, I think I've discerned that too. And watching a lot of the comedy specials is that the best people are being themselves. They're
Hmm.
prepared, but they're really showing you something who they are. And the ones who aren't, you could tell they're not really, they're trying to put on a persona that they think is
Right.
a successful comedian, and it's just not working sometimes. Let's get into some of the really edgy stuff you do. What's the stuff that really has gotten audiences riled up or gotten complaints or gotten people to say, oh my God, I can't believe you brought that up, or things like that? You really try to push it that far?
I don't know. I don't think anything I do is particularly offensive or edgy. It's to me, they're just things I think we need to be having a conversation about rationally and logically. And I think if you can laugh about some of these harder topics to talk about, then it becomes a little bit easier to address, and not just address, but address it with discourse, and just be respectful of each other. I did a bit. I wrote an album about mental health and the way that society views mental health and how some of like the sociopolitical topics get revolved around mental health. And I talked about gun control and I articulated that I disagree with both sides. Right. I don't think we can ban all the weapons, and I don't think we should be arming everybody either. I think both of those are um, they're solutions that won't work. And I gave my arguments for why I don't think they'll work. But the large point of it, and this is, to me, this is what the crux of the argument should be, is what are we doing to make sure that people aren't killing each other? That's the whole point, right? And sometimes the audience would get upset, especially when I would do it in more conservative areas, um, because they didn't care that I'm also making fun of the Bannett people. I'm
Mhm.
hitting both sides and providing an argument in the middle. The middle argument is, why are people killing each other, and what can we do to make that happen less, right? Uh, and I've had people threaten to shoot me, which is like, did you miss the point? I kind of feel like you proved my point. you know, um, I, I mean, like, I've done anti-war material, which again is, it depends on the person that's in the crowd. I've had people on the left get offended by it just for the idea of me bringing it up in conversation, like it's too taboo of a subject matter to address. And I've had people on the right bring it up to me, saying that if I'm not for war, I'm obviously anti-veteran. I'm obviously not patriotic, and this is treasonous things and all this. It's just like stuff that we've heard since the '60s. But again, to me, it's an important thing, because the argument that I'm making is, well, we're spending, I mean, trillions on war, but we can't, make sure that everybody is healthy and taken care of. We can't make sure that people have clean water, and pointing out the absurdity of that in comparison to what should be done. To me, that's funny.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
you know, um, and but it's hard to get people to see that. again, if people are willing to kind of let go a little bit and take a step back,
You
they
bring
can
them
see the
along.
humor. Yeah, and those are the moments that that because I've definitely had moments where I'm like, this is all I hate everything.
Okay.
Because I either people aren't getting it and I'm having a hard time articulating something. But the moment where I had a conservative veteran in Louisville, Kentucky come up and talk to me and buy me a drink because he was like, yeah, I disagreed with your point on immigration, but I get your perspective, but I agreed with you on all your anti-war ideologies.
Yeah.
And I was like,
We
great, let's talk about it.
Yeah, we have a question about the pandemic era, the pandemic we're in now. Is it a different, how it's affecting your career? But first, I want to ask: is the pandemic funny? Is there anything funny about the pandemic? I've been trying to figure that out. What's funny about it?
It's darkly funny. I think it's exposing a lot of the cracks in the system that we're living in and how absurd the system we've been living in is. So it's kind of darkly funny in that way.
Darkly.
Yeah, I think, well, the other thing I've kind of realized doing this type of humor is that you do have to have a little bit of a dark sense of humor
Mhm.
in order to do it. Like I never considered myself for somebody to have a dark sense of humor, but the more I do it, the more I'm realizing that like you kind of do, especially if you're looking at the problems in the world and and kind of attack, like the victim of the joke is the system, not the people that are affected by the system. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Like when you're kind of punching up in that way, some of the things have to be dark or they're darkly satiric. So I think that's where the pandemic falls into.
Specifically for you, is this brought about some different changes in your career? I mean, because you're not touring, is it changing a
Yeah.
lot about what you do?
Absolutely. It was quite a bit of a challenge because I'm just not used to being in one place for this long. This is the longest that I've like stayed still, and it's unnerving. But I switched to a digital platform pretty quickly. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. So the first thing I did was start doing live streams every single day, which
Hmm.
is exhausting. Uh, because I'm talking about, I'm doing an hour to an hour and a half live streams every day where I'm talking about either one very large idea, something like ranked choice voting, right? That's a big idea. It's very different. So let's talk about that. And that's, I talk about that for a while. Or I take a couple different stories. Like I think there was a story about um, sanctions being put on different countries, like economic sanctions, and then I talked about like mental health, like what the pandemic is doing with mental health. Uh, but it's very exhausting because the way that I kind of go through it is I have to look all of this stuff up.
Hmm.
So I'm waking up and then I'm doing a couple hours worth of research,
Yeah.
taking all these notes, and then just riffing on this topic for an hour and a half, and then keeping up with people leaving comments and stuff. But really, the major shift came along later towards the summer when I figured out how to do shows over Zoom, very similar to this, where and really and I basically like did a test show. It went well enough, and then I started doing it every other Friday, and then I switched to every Friday.
Hmm.
And now I'm doing it 3 Fridays out of every month so that I can take a week to relax because I was kind of running it as just a regular stand-up show, but I realized that I have repeat customers, like people that keep coming every single week. So I don't want them to keep hearing the same material over and over again. So I decided that I was going to just talk about a topic and do my research for it and write a new script every single week. So that's the new schedule that I've kind of been working on.
Hmm.
Is so it's a good. I like the schedule, but
Okay.
if I did it every single week, like I do get burnt out
Yeah.
because it's 12-13 hours worth of research and then all day writing, um, and then editing while keeping up with all of the other social media crap that I got to do
Mhm.
to get the word out, managing my email list and putting things up on my website and stuff. So if I have a week where I don't have to do that and I have, a little bit more downtime, it makes a lot of difference. So I think really the pandemic has made me look at self-care with comedy. Like I don't have to go as hard as I did in my 20s because I'm going to be 32 in October, and like I I went for a walk the other day and I probably didn't step properly, and like now my shin kind of hurts, and I feel like this is just how my shin is going to be forever. Like that's so I have to like take better care of myself.
Yeah.
And I think the pandemic has kind of shown that um, you know, maybe you don't need to go out on, you know, 12-week tours anymore. You can figure out how to do, 3-week tours or 4-week tours and be more efficient in developing material, developing a fan base. And I think now that we've opened up this virtual world, um, like this is an opportunity for me to do shows and
Yeah.
connect with areas that I don't think I would be connecting with.
Yeah, that's what a lot of things have come from that. Finding we don't need to do the travel. We could do a lot of communication this way, and changing a lot of patterns, and may change the whole comedy world, adding a lot
Yeah.
more people and
I will.
podcasts.
I will. I do miss. I do miss live performances. There is. I don't know. There's nothing. There's a kind of energy in the room, and just kind of being in front of people. So I do miss that, but
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm not eager enough to. I don't know. It just doesn't feel socially responsible right now to even kind of outdoor shows. I'm a little iffy on. The vibe doesn't feel right, and it kind of feels like why risk it right now. So I'm fine with the virtual stuff for now, and hopefully by 2021 I'll be able to get back on the road.
We'll be in virtual reality rooms with goggles.
Yeah.
Cameras. That'll be next. It's coming real soon. So I'm sure you'll be adapting to it because you're into the technology.
Yeah.
Just give us for one last segment, your future. What do you think 5 years, 10 years from now, where we're going to find you?
I'm hoping that I can just keep touring and pushing the craft, and
Okay.
there have been some subject matters that I've wanted to address, and I don't think I had either the skill or um, I wasn't in the right emotional place to talk about them. You know what I mean? There are subjects that I'm too passionate about, and when you get too passionate about something, you kind of get some horse blinders on them. Yeah, so I'm hoping to kind of be able to keep pushing the form, and be able to take more risks, and hopefully be able to fill those 30 to 50 seats in every city around the country. That's my
And for
goal.
the classic question, not just for a young person, but for anybody, career changer perhaps, wants to get into comedy, what's your advice? Anybody, any age says, boy, I like a lot of what he said. I want to try it. What do you think?
Don't do it. No, I'm kidding. I would say save your money. That's the biggest advice I can give you is save your money and learn how to be frugal. You don't have to eat at restaurants every single day just because you're on the road. This is still a job. Learn little tips and tricks, talk to people, and take their advice, especially when it comes to the boring side of comedy. You don't need to take creative advice from everybody, although some people might have that, but save your money, learn how to budget yourself properly, and take care of your health. That's a big thing because touring is very demanding on your body. You wouldn't think it, but I mean, you're going from city to city, you're in a car for anywhere from 2 to 6 hours, sometimes longer. So like take care of your body, take care of your mind, and know that you're allowed to take breaks. That is something that has been really, really difficult for me to learn.
Hmm.
But just because you didn't tour this week or whatever doesn't mean that you're going to be forgotten. It's okay. And go at the pace that you feel comfortable with, but save your money, Don't quit your job just because you got one out of town gig. This stuff takes time to build, and if you're dedicated enough to it, soon enough you won't need a day job.
And there's no shortage of funny things to make observations about.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of absurdity
history.
in the world.
Yeah, very good.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Krish. It's been great to talk to you.
Yeah.
Very interesting and informative, and wish you great success. I'm going to keep following your career. And
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that.
And thanks for helping us out on Worldly Experiences. You're going to live on in perpetuity in our library, and helping out young people and anybody, career changers, along the way to get into comedy for all of eternity. All right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. This was fun. I enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.